I'm Megan from Wacasa. I'm our evaluation coordinator. We're really excited today to be having Mary and Abby present from Awareness to Action. This is a program of the Wisconsin, the Children's Hospital of Wisconsin, and it's in partnership with the Wisconsin Child Abuse and Neglect Prevention Board. And with no further ado, I'll turn things over to Mary and Abby.
Thanks, Megan. As Megan said, my name is Mary Kleman, and I'm a prevention manager with Children's Wisconsin. And as part of that role, I oversee Awareness to Action, which is the Wisconsin Child Sexual Abuse Prevention Project. And with me is
Abby Kibar. I'm the program coordinator for Awareness to Action. So a lot of my role is based in the policy and procedure training that we'll go over in a little bit.
Thanks. So just a little background on Awareness to Action. About 12 years ago, the Child Abuse and Neglect Prevention Board, which at the time was the local CTF and Children's Hospital, looked at child sexual abuse prevention from the standpoint of there were a lot of staff and organizations doing good work in the schools and getting the message of prevention out to kids. But what they wanted to do was really look at how do we engage adults in protecting kids. This is an audience. We took out from our PowerPoint almost all of the education pieces around child sexual abuse because you get the topic, you understand the state of child sexual abuse in our area and in the state, and you understand prevention. So really what Awareness to Action wanted to do is how do we engage adults in protecting kids, because we know it's not really fair to ask kids to protect themselves. Okay. So I did leave this slide in just from the standpoint of when we looked at educating adults, one of the first programs we settled on, and I'll go over this later, is Stewards of Children, which is an organization and a program from Darkness to Light in South Carolina. It's about a 2.5-hour program. And we wanted to land on a statistic that stewards used and that we would use in our presentations, in that they use this statistic that the 1 in 10 children experience sexual abuse before their 18th birthday. So when we're talking to adults and communities, that's the statistic that we use. I should have also prefaced, and I'm sorry, both Peter and Megan are looking at any chat boxes. So if you have questions as Abby and I are going through pieces of this, please let us know, and we're happy to answer questions along the way. As part of what we do too, again, I'm not going to go into this in any detail, but we also talk about ACEs to our audiences, because when we started doing this work, we thought everyone was going to be interested in this, because who's not going to want to learn how to protect kids? A lot of you are probably laughing right now because you know how difficult it is to engage individuals in this topic, particularly in the general community. So what we were looking at, in addition to doing stewards and then using the ACE information to engage people, this is why it's so important. This is why we need to prevent child sexual abuse from ever happening in the first place. So we do go through quite a bit of the ACEs data in our presentations, only from the standpoint of this is why it's so important. And those of us who are familiar with ACEs and all of this data, at least myself, I know sometimes I come under the mistaken assumption that everybody knows this information. That's a mistake that I sometimes make, because a lot of our audiences that we're going out to really don't have a handle on this data. So in addition to doing stewards, one of the things that we found when we were going to communities was we were getting a lot of youth serving organizations coming to our Stewards of Children trainings. And when we would talk to them about what their policies were to protect kids, Some of them were pretty scary, all the way from not having anything at all to, well, everybody who comes to work for us has the best of intentions, so we're not really worried about this anyway. So we looked into the CDC, the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, has a document called Preventing Child Sexual Abuse Within Youth Serving Organizations. So we used that document to start developing a training to help youth serving organizations really learn how to put best practices in place to protect the kids that are going to their programs. We piloted some trainings in areas of the state. We did Fox Valley, the Rhinelander Northwoods area, in Janesville. And from those initial trainings came up with now a more refined training where we actually have video clips from, number one, organizations who have already gone through the training, and number two, experts in the field of child sexual abuse, both from a perpetration lens and a standpoint lens, a prevention lens. Some of the people that we have in this training, if you're familiar with it all, Dr. Lynn Sheets, who works for Children's Wisconsin, Dr. Barbara Knox, who formerly worked for American Family Children's Hospital, and then interviewed several of the organizations who went through that initial training and talked to them about what they were able to change and what they were able to do with those organizations. So I've referenced a couple of things, stewards of children, which I'm going to talk about a little bit later, but right now we want to focus more on the policy and procedure piece and what that training really entails, and I'm going to turn it over to Abby to talk a little bit about that.
Thanks, Mary. So if we go to the next slide, I'll just play a brief video for you. Like Mary had said, in our training, we hear a lot from experts in the field as well as people that have gone through. So this is just kind of an intro into our training on why this is so important for organizations to do.
When you think about situations that perpetrators might choose to prey upon children, think about where children are present, and that's often in youth-serving organizations or receiving services from youth-serving organizations. And so, first and foremost, we as adults, just adults in general, have a duty to the children, moreover than any duty that we have to each other as adults. So we have a duty to protect children. They're the most vulnerable people in our society.
Organizations need systems that keep sex offenders or potential sex offenders from being alone with children. What works is deflection, cutting down on opportunities for offenders to molest kids, not detection. I think organizations ought to take sex offenders very seriously. I have interviewed them for 30 years, and I am sobered by how effective they are at penetrating organizations and how many victims they have. Organizations are natural targets for sex offenders. If you're a pedophile, where do you want to be? You want to be where there are children. And youth-serving organizations are prime targets. They are literally under siege all the time by sex offenders who are trying to infiltrate the staff.
So the framework in which most organizations deal with something like child sexual abuse or child abuse within the organization is they tend to retreat back and surround to protect those involved, and at the same time thinking that they're protecting the children. In reality, we need to put the child first and what's in the best interest of the child. So organizations need to understand that by putting that child first and how to address, it actually not only provides better outcomes for the child, but it also provides better outcomes for the organization, because there's learnings in all of that that become effective and then help disseminate that information in protecting our children.
All right. So I love when Anna Salter says in there, where do pedophiles want to be? They want to be where children are. Their youth serving organizations are constantly under siege. That really hit me hard because before taking this role, I was working in those youth serving organizations. So just to know, you know, the policies and procedures that these places need to put in place to make sure that they're protecting the kids in their programs. So this next slide here is talking about what our training entails. So I go into communities throughout the state where we do a 3-hour initial training where participants from agencies in that community learn about the 6 core components that Mary had talked about before that the Center for Disease and Control and Protection put into place around their policies and procedures. So we go through that and we'll go through each of those core components in a little bit. So that's about a 3-hour training where they develop an action plan for their specific organization. So this can, each organization can run very differently and have to have different policies for different things. So we really encourage them we don't have just a blanket policy that they get to fill in with their organization's name and everything just goes on the shelf. They really create a plan that is specific to their organization. After that training, they receive the technical assistance and support from me. I have a copy of their plan so they can call me at any time and we can talk through some of the struggles that they might be having. I have information from other organizations that have gone through and different policies that they've changed that I share with new organizations that have come through. So it's really about keeping this alive, keeping this going after that initial training. We come back together in the 3-month mark and then also again in the 6-month mark where organizations can bring the things that they're working on. This is very informal where we just talk about struggles that they've had, things that have worked for them. They share their ideas, they share the changes that they've made with the other organizations in their group or what we call a community of practice. We've extended that community of practice to look at not just the communities that are going through, but also organizations that are similar. So we've had Boys and Girls Clubs go through, Big Brothers, Big Sisters, libraries, schools. So I'm bringing some of those policies and procedures to the table as well that I can share forward with organizations that are going through now.
And that might be a good time to just say, when we say youth serving organizations, we have to be honest in that we're dropping that term from our training just because there are organizations that should be taking this type of training and for whatever reason don't see themselves as a youth serving organization. So as Abby already alluded to, we have had a wide range of organizations go through this training, everything from ones that you'd expect, Boys and Girls Clubs, Big Brothers, Big Sisters, Head Starts, daycares. We've also had organizations like libraries, museums, other places that have programming for kids, but might not see themselves falling in that youth serving organization category. So this training really is applicable to any organization that has kids involved as part of their programming. We've had sexual assault centers and domestic violence centers as well. So it is the broadest definition of youth serving organization in this training.
Yes, thank you, Mary, for pointing that out. So in addition to all of that, we give you access to different trainings, like Mary had talked about before, Stewards of Children that she'll go into, mandated reporter trainings. We give you access to a secure part on our website that have more resources on flyers on how to talk about healthy sexual development, videos from the experts that you see in the video that that organizations can then put into their newsletters or send out to their parents. So we just set you up with quite a few trainings and resources after this training is done.
And one resource that we're always encouraging organizations to connect with is their local sexual assault service provider.
Absolutely.
Because what we're trying to do is just come in with this training, set up communities to be able to self-sustain. We're not going to be there all the time, but a local sexual assault service provider is. So that connection is an important one to be made as we start going through the training process.
Yes, absolutely. Because that's, after the 6 months, I'm not falling off completely. I'm there if people have questions, things like that. But really, we're trying to make those connections within the community. So like Mary said, with their local staffs and things like that. We do try to keep this going, though, so that it's not just a training that you take and put on the shelf. So we're sending out quarterly newsletters that have the new resources that we're developing and anything that's going on with Awareness to Action. We're sending out those newsletters, trying to keep it going longer than just the training itself.
Because really what we're looking at is a culture shift for the organization so that thinking about child safety becomes second nature, and it's not something that even sometimes they do consciously, but it's embedded in staff meetings in these different pieces that Abby will be going through later. The other thing I want to really emphasize is that initial clip is kind of scary. This training is not about scaring organizations into, gee, you need to do this because everyone's a pedophile. We actually take the opposite track with this, in most of the people in your organization are there because they want to help kids, because they're good people. What we go through in different parts of the training is we can't differentiate, however, between all of those employees that are really there to help kids and that person who might be there to harm a kid. So what we are talking about is universal precaution. This is just the way we do things because we want to make sure everyone, our staff, our kids in our program, families, are all safe. And we've implemented these to make sure everyone's safe. So I don't want people to think that this is one of those where we go in and try to scare people to be part of this. It really is about empowering organizations to put in universal precautions to protect kids and families.
Yeah, and that's a good point to bring up, Mary. That is some of the feedback that we get from some organizations, or some pushback, I should say, is that, well, if we do something like this, our parents are going to come in asking why we're doing this. Has something happened, to my kid, or has something happened in your organization? And it's really framing for those organizations. We want parents to be coming in. We want them to be asking what policies and procedures you have. And these are this is the things that you can say to these parents is, no, we are taking the steps needed to make sure that your kids are safe and that nothing does happen to them. So just reframing that in more of a positive way. So
and empowering parents to what to ask. One of the most exciting things, at least for me, was we did an interview because we are updating the video component of our training, and I interviewed an organization who implemented the policy and procedure work, is very serious about it, and the person that I was speaking to was very excited herself because they run a children's youth Bible camp. And she said she had 3 parents call her and ask, what policies do you have in place to protect kids in your organization? And she said she didn't know if they had gone to another organization in the community, but very excited that parents are starting to ask these questions as they go to organizations to find out what their policies indeed are.
absolutely. All right, so this is getting a little deeper into what our training offers. So like we had mentioned before, the 6 core components for effective protection policy. So we'll go through each of these more in detail, but screening and selecting of employees and volunteers, guidelines on interactions, monitoring behavior, ensuring safe environments, responding to inappropriate behavior, and training about child sexual abuse. So I put this in here to show you, I had mentioned the work plan before that each organization goes home with. So this is just for component 1. We go through the video portion of our training, and then organizations have a chance to fill out this sheet to see how they're doing and places that they're going to need a little more work. So this is where they get to write down things that they'd like to work on and some barriers that they're going to find after filling out each of these sheets. So we go through component 1, they fill out this sheet, we come together as a group and really discuss how that's going to look in their organization, some things that they think that they're going to have some difficulty with, and I can talk them through some of those things. Organizations have come and said, we're doing a really good job in this area, and they share at this point even sometimes the things that they're doing with other organizations, and so it's really a sharing of ideas as well. So we can go on to component 1, screening and selecting of employees and volunteers. So in here, we really talk about the application, your application form, code of conduct. Are you sharing that with staff throughout their time with your organization, or is this something that's just being shown at the very beginning, signed, going on a shelf, or are we updating this as we go along? We go into criminal background checks as well as personal references, things like that. The next one, we can show you a few, on the next slide is a few example interview questions that we try to highlight to put into their interviews to get a little bit deeper into if someone is seeking out a specific age or gender of a child, or looking to work with a specific age or gender of a child, things like that. Anything else with this one?
Well, and this is often the one where organizations go, oh, we've got this, but basically what they do is a background check and nothing more. So we're talking about going beyond that background check, actually interviewing someone, sharing with them the code of conduct and what is expected in your organization to possibly screen out some individuals who might be looking for an easier organization to get into if you state right up front. As I said, this is the one that most organizations do well on. You would be surprised the number of organizations that don't even do as much as a criminal background check. So if we can even get that one checked off, we're pretty happy.
Yeah, and I will say too, a lot of organizations do a really good job with their employees. Where we're finding some scary spots are when it comes to volunteers. It's a one-time volunteer, why we have to go through this process, and it's just kind of reminding them that people are coming in and getting access to kids in your organization, and they're really seeking them outside of that organization. So even if it is a one-time thing, what are some things you can put in place so that you're not letting someone even come into your organization?
Yeah, those volunteers and parents.
Correct. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
All right. Let's get back to guidelines on interactions between individuals. So here we really go into talking about those appropriate positive interactions between youth and employees, and also youth with other youth participants in organizations. We talk about setting appropriate ratios in terms of your programming. We talk about one-on-one interactions. So are we limiting one-on-one interactions? We know quite a few organizations like Big Brothers, Big Sisters are very much a one-on-one sort of situation. So if you are having that one-on-one interaction, are those interactions observable and interruptible? Are they happening in public? Going into more of those details. So this is, again, where we talk about those work plans are designed specifically for those organizations. Mary put up the next slide here where we talk about the 80% or more of child sexual abuse happens in isolated one-on-one incidents, which I think many organizations are very surprised by, as well as the 40% are abused by older or more powerful children. So that youth on youth and really monitoring those interactions as well.
And we kept those in. Again, this is an audience that knows this stuff. This is generally what surprises organizations that we're dealing with that don't deal with this in their day-to-day world, especially the older and more powerful youth piece around, as Abby had alluded to earlier, organizations generally are really good about monitoring adult interactions. They're not always as good at monitoring those where they've put an older child in charge, or those types of situations aren't always on their radar as much as they should be. So this training, those are the two that most often are kind of that aha moment for organizations that aren't into this work every day.
Yeah, absolutely. And organizations have done a really good job in this component, creating a do's and don'ts and appropriate and inappropriate interactions with staff, and then also going as far as what that youth to youth interaction and inappropriate behaviors look like.
And also working with organizations that quite often sex offenders will use the organization to get in with the family. So talking about what are their policies around interactions outside of the organization as well.
Absolutely. Monitoring behavior. So here we're talking about formal and informal supervision to observe and monitor how employees and volunteers are interacting with youth. How is the organization responding to observations that may be considered at risk or inappropriate? Is there a protocol that employees and volunteers have to follow in terms of their roles and responsibilities and how they are reporting? So we really talk about here those grooming behaviors. So things that don't really rise to the level of sexual abuse, but those things that are just fall in that inappropriate behavior that they go into on those guidelines on interactions, and where those things are being reported. Is there a place that staff can go and put this? And if it happens one time, the employee is made aware of it, and this breaks our policy. Just wanting to let you know. And if it never happens again, that's fine. It's there, and they were made aware of it. But if there needs to be a place that if this continues to happen and we see more of these grooming behaviors happen, that there is a place where all of this is documented, because in our video, Anna Salter talks about grooming is not going to happen in front of the same person every time. So she uses the example of one teacher, sees a student in a classroom alone with the teacher with the lights out. Another sees that child getting into a car with the teacher. Another person sees, an older student holding hands with the teacher walking down the hall. So just all of those grooming behaviors and things that may break the policies and procedures that they have in place, and a place where all of those things can be put together, because you hear all of those together and that's an alarming thing. And again, like we said, if it's only happening once, they're not being penalized, but if this is happening over and over again, that it's more of a conversation and something that can be reported.
And a big part of this component that we talk about with organizations, and I've always wanted to have something different than monitoring because that sounds so big brother-ish.
Mm-hmm.
What it's really about is creating a climate where you can talk about these things, where an employee who sees that teacher in the room with the lights out or with the door closed isn't afraid to say something because they don't want to ruin that person's career, or they don't want it to seem like they're accusing them of something. It's, hey, this is our policy, that shouldn't happen. And these things are discussed without the fear of repercussion if it's a one-time thing or it's someone who isn't even aware of the policies. It's a culture where you talk about what's going on, what are our best practices, and you didn't do that, so let's move forward. But if it continues to happen, you see that pattern that's concerning.
Absolutely. So again, documentation, we kind of discussed this. Is there a place that all employees and volunteers know that they can go where these incidents can be documented? And like we said, if it's a one-time thing, it's there and we don't worry about it. But again, if grooming behavior is happening, that we can see it, and employees are encouraged to make those reports.
And we've even heard from organizations that employees are bringing up their own incidents that happened. I remember one organization, a staff member was like, okay, this child keeps asking to be Facebook friends with me in my personal account, and this happened. Or there was one where a text went out and then so even that employees themselves feel empowered to say, hey, this happened, I don't know how to handle it, what should we do? That these discussions just keep happening.
Ensuring safe environments. So this is really where we go into the specific organization itself. So they're looking at looking at no closed door policy. If a door needs to be closed, that it's unlocked. That rooms that are not being used, that those are locked, so that kids aren't, able to go in there. They're not able to access those rooms when no one is monitoring them. I think this is the one where we talk about. Mary talks about a school and an organization up in her community that had, the mats that were teepeed, and a child brought another child in and sexually assaulted them. So just taking a look at their environment and what might be a risky situation. We've had organizations go through, they take an actual tour of their organization, of their programming area, and write down all of the kind of risky things that may be of concern, and put that into their policies. So,
and it also is for organizations that have off-site. So your actual facility might be really safe, but when we take kids off-site, what does that look like? What happens when we all go to the pool and kids need to use the restroom? So again, as Abby had said, this is really very specific to the organization and what is going on with that organization. You don't have anything happening in your actual office, okay, but everything happens off-site. What does that off-site place look like? This is also one where I've seen organizations have some really quick, easy wins. Oh, we just need to lock the doors so kids don't have access to unused rooms. Mm-hmm. We can check that one off. We really encourage organizations to get some of those really quick wins that aren't going to cost them a lot of money or a lot of time, but they can implement immediately and increase safety.
Yeah, and I think with this one too, we've had organizations go through that share a space with, you know, I'm just thinking about, there's a Boys and Girls Club that shares a room off of the museum in their community. And so having conversations then with that museum, because they're sharing restrooms, as to what, you know, these are our policies. So opening that conversation up to more people in the community to what this is going to look like, and they were very receptive and very open to it. So yeah, those off-site sort of buildings too. And then component 5, responding to inappropriate behavior. So this goes beyond that monitoring behavior that we were talking before. So do your staff and volunteers know where to go to report those things that have risen to the level. We find in a lot that they're just going and telling their supervisor, they're not making those actual reports. So developing a call list that's posted throughout the organization that all employees and volunteers know who they need to call if something happens, things like that. Yeah, so this just again goes into defining those behaviors that we need to respond to, and actions that need to be taken. And then child sexual abuse prevention training. So this is really where we go into encouraging organizations that go through this. So usually we have 1 or 2 people from the organization go through, so encouraging them to have their staff come do a Stewards of Children, which Mary will talk about here next. But in addition to this, we've also have organizations create their own. So out of the resources that we've given them, the little video clips that we've given them, they've created their own, I don't want to say training, but in their staff meetings, they're pulling up one of these resources, they're pulling up one of these videos, that they're keeping this going throughout the year, that they pick a new topic each staff meeting, and that is being discussed, like Mary had talked about, that we're creating that culture, that this isn't something that we can't talk about, that needs to be hush-hush, that we talk about it openly at our staff meetings and things like that.
So I'm just going to go into a little bit more about Stewards of Children, which is actually where Awareness to Action started landing on in the beginning, as one of the very few, if not only, trainings that are out there right now, specifically directed at adults and teaching adults how to protect kids. So if in order to do Stewards of Children, you have to be a Stewards of Children facilitator. One of the things about Stewards is, as good as it is, it's also not cheap. So you have to become a facilitator, and becoming a facilitator, there's a cost of $450 per facilitator. And then there is a workbook that also goes along with the training. So once you're a facilitator, you need to have access to these workbooks, and each workbook for every person in your training is $7. So one of the things that we've been able to do through our grant with the Child Abuse and Neglect Prevention Board is support the Stewards of Children facilitators training, and then also provide workbooks to organizations who have a facilitator that want to go out and do the training in their community at no cost. I'm going to go through that a little bit more in detail later, but just about Stewards. So it really focuses on 5 steps: to learn the facts, minimize opportunities, talk about it, recognize the signs, and react responsibly. As part of what we do through Awareness to Action, while we provide the books, as part of that, we ask our facilitators to do an evaluation for their participants. So we have a pre and a post evaluation. that anyone going through Stewards of Children are asked to fill out, and then we also do a 6-month follow-up. I have this data for anyone who's really interested, because I know it's going to be really small on the screen, but what this data enables us to do is go to funders and say, this training is making a difference. I often point, as I'm speaking with people, number 8 is, I believe that fewer children would be sexually abused if adults made more conscious choices about the situation in which children were placed. Pre-test, about 50% of the people, adults attending this agree. Post-test, 92%. So Stewards of Children is making a big impact on empowering adults to know that there are concrete things that they can do to protect the kids in their lives. And you see that's kind of the theme throughout everything that we're talking about, both with the youth serving organizations piece and Stewards of Children. Again, Stewards is very video-based. It has survivors talking about what happened to them and things that adults could have been. This is all meant to be empowering, not scary, and that this is so huge that we're not going to be able to do this. So I'm going to go to the quality piece as well, in that we asked the 2 quality questions during Stewards, and almost everyone stated that they felt their facilitator was well prepared and knowledgeable. And 98% of the people going through this training said they would recommend it to others. If we struggle with something, it's the length of the training. It's 2.5 hours, and it's sometimes difficult to get people to commit that amount of time. So that's why we really tie it to the policy and procedure work, trying to get at least those organizations to go through. And we can refer to this. This data is given to all facilitators for a couple of reasons. One, as you're trying to encourage people to come, this is good data to have. And also where we can support facilitators by paying for their training and paying for their workbooks, we realize organizations still have to pay salaries. It costs organizations to have their staff go out and do these trainings. So we provide this data so that as a local organization, a local FAFSA or a local facilitator, you might go to your United Way or a local foundation and ask for the staff time to do this training and make it more feasible within your organization. The other thing that we found as we're doing the policy and procedure work is, as organizations go through, they're saying, hey, this would be a really great thing for our parents to have. So that then they're opening the training not only to their staff, but to parents as well. Darkness to Light, I encourage anyone who's interested in learning more about Stewards to go onto Darkness to Light's website. They have some great materials. They are also doing a campaign called Flip the Switch. Thank you, Abby, where you can actually take the training online at no cost, just to see if that might be something that you or your organization might be interested in, A, either having a facilitator, or B, bringing to your community, because we do have facilitators throughout the state. I'm just going to show a really quick clip of Stewards. Just to give
I grew
you
up in the picture perfect family. I was called the debutante Miss America. I was the first Miss America that they ever brought a family up on stage.
Oh.
My father continued to sexually violate children and teenagers until he died at age 75.
I still cannot even say what really happened, other than he had sexual acts with me and had me perform them, but I still can't say it. I mean, I don't know if I ever will.
And that's what I feel that was taken from me. My virginity, my youth. You're never the same after that.
What I've heard from people who abuse often is that all of the signs were there, but no one bothered to ask them about it. No one in their family, no one in their work. And we need to learn how to see what's going on and begin to ask questions.
Whether you're a mandated reporter or not, it's your moral obligation to stand up for children.
We have to understand that doing the right thing is not doing the easy thing.
Law enforcement is never going to investigate their way out of these type of crimes, these crimes against children. It's only through prevention that we can help stem the tide.
If you spare one child, I mean, people don't have a clue the ripples from one child. So you stop one source of ripples, I mean, that is huge.
The same survivors, they'll speak out. For some organizations will then get called.
So again, that's just a quick overview of stewards. I encourage anyone interested, again, go on Darkness to Light. Through the Flip the Switch campaign, you can actually see the training, see if it would be of interest. So becoming a Stewards of Children facilitator, we have stewards trainings usually about twice a year to help people become facilitators. So anyone who's interested, we have a application process. We don't currently have another training scheduled. If I get enough interest, I can certainly look into scheduling one. My hesitancy is always, it's winter, it's Wisconsin, yay. But we can look into doing something if there is enough interest generated after this call of actually having a Stewards of Children facilitator training. We are very fortunate, and I don't know, Helen, if you're on the call, if you are, hello. Helen Kovacin is a trainer for stewards, and we're fortunate to have her here in the state, which allows us a lot more flexibility than some other organizations might have to be able to schedule Stewards of Children facilitator trainings. So that's kind of a wrap up of stewards.
Yeah, I can take it back over, going back to policy and procedure. So to talk more about the integration and that community of practice that we were talking about. So after we go through the 6 core components, everyone has a work plan for their organization. We really like to go back into that technical assistance piece and creating that community of practice. So community of practice to us used to mean just the organizations that went through in that community, that they could share their ideas. We've broadened that as more organizations have gone through to connect big brothers, big sisters that have gone through, boys and girls clubs that have gone through, schools, libraries. So I'm creating those email lists where they can share the things that they have done since their organizations may be, more similar than a library and what a school might, what their policies might look like. So I'm creating a different kind of community of practice. So we can show the video here where you hear from organizations that have gone through.
My participation in the community of practice was very valuable to me. First of all, I was meeting new people who were doing the same things that I was doing, and we were all at different levels. And so I learned from them, and I also came away feeling that we had really tackled a lot already, but had more to do.
My favorite part of participating in the program, I think, was the group interactions that I had with other organizations in the community. I think it helped us form a stronger bond, and we're able to connect with each other when we need resources. We didn't have to recreate the wheel. If somebody had a screening tool that they were already using, they were more than willing to share it with the rest of us, and it saved everybody a lot of time. So that even now that the program is over, we are still in contact with each other, and if we need something, we're more than willing to help each other out with that.
even though sexual abuse of a child is really unthinkable, it's a reality. When you think about how common it is, this is common, and whether you realize it or not, you know people who've been sexually abused. And how are we going to change that as a society? We have to start taking responsibility and changing this one child at a time.
So I thought that was a really great video to kind of talk about the organizations that have gone through and what they've gotten from this organization. So you get an assessment tool to provide you with some of the key things that we talk about in the training. I work with organizations to make those changes, sharing of ideas. We get you additional information for staff, for parents, participants in form of rack cards, flyers, newsletter inserts. Like I talked before, our website, hwaywisconsin.org, they get a secure login on there where I'm constantly updating that with different things that we're getting, things like that. So we're discussing this on an individual level and then as a whole agencies as they go through. So how can you bring this training to your community? We've done this in a couple different ways. If there is interest, I have done informational meetings where I have gone down to a community and we usually ask for one contact person in that community. So if that's any of you that would like to bring this to your community, I ask for your help to kind of, for those contacts that you have in your community, to either do an informational meeting where I come down and I go over our training for other organizations that have questions or need a little more information to generate that buy-in. I've gone down and I've done this. It can be something like an hour meeting where I go through this. I've also gone down and done this at meetings that are already happening in your community. So like youth coalition meetings. So an organized group that's already meeting with, that are bringing all of these people to the table. I've gone down and just done a 10-15 minute presentation on what our organization offers, getting that interest in the community, and then working with you to schedule that training for organizations in the community. And like we had said before, this is really a broad term in terms of youth serving. So this is anyone that has youth coming into their programming or anything like that. Anything I'm missing on how we can bring this?
Yeah, I think it's just, if there is any interest, we walk this fine balance of, we want organizations to know that this is, if you're going to do this, this is actual work. It's not something that you attend one training and you check off a box and you put your organization's name into some templates and you're done. It really is a deep dive into the organization and the community and how we can protect kids. And having said that, there is incredibly positive feedback from organizations and communities that have done it, and time after time we hear, gee, this organization should be here and this organization should be here. So probably the biggest barrier that we encounter is just getting organizations to the table. Once they're to the table, they understand it, they realize it, and they want to learn more. It's where we need help is actually just getting those introductions into communities to help us and help organizations realize that they really need to be doing this both for the health of their organization and for kids and families. So that goes for both stewards and the policy and procedure. We have the training. It's a very good training. Organizations that go through it. Stewards of children, the same thing. It's an excellent training. It's getting organizations and people to realize that this topic is important, and we've had some doors open and some entrees now because it's becoming part of the conversation. We've got the Me Too movement. We've got other incidents which raise it, and we kind of rise and fall with, oh, there's a Penn State, there's interest, well, not anymore, oh, now there's this. But we see these things time and time again. So the other thing I might encourage is if you see something that has happened in your community, if there's an incident of child sexual abuse in a school or in an organization, and you think that would be a good time for us to come and talk to organizations, you know, just always know that we're here. The next slide that we have are mine and Abby's contact information. So Abby, if you just want to move that. And we are here to help. We wanted to leave a lot of time in this for your questions and comments. Know that we know there is so much that needs to be done. We have a very small grant. We're doing what we think we can with that amount. We cannot do this work without partners. WCASA has been a very strong partner of ours, and so we work very closely with them, and we work with communities to make sure that we're moving this work forward. And I just want to say a thank you to all of you who are boots on the ground in your communities doing this work already. And so now I'd just like to open it up to any questions.
Wonderful. Thanks so much, Mary. We're not seeing any questions coming in just yet, but I do want to say when watching the video about the community of practice, to me, what they were saying felt very familiar to me because it's how I feel about the folks that I've met through working with A2A. As a result of that, I know who to go to if I need a contact at a whole variety of agencies, between DOC being involved and DPI being involved.
Yeah, thank you. I should have mentioned that with Awareness to Action, we have a statewide steering committee, and as was mentioned, DPI is at the table, DOC, Department of Corrections, I'm sorry if I'm using acronyms, who you wouldn't think is a usual partner, but yet they're looking at getting our information out at sex offender notification meetings in communities, because that's when people are all up in arms and not understanding some of the information around child sexual abuse. And I've got to give some big kudos to the Department of Public Instruction, who is allowing us to do a version of this training, a very, very short version of this training that they put on their website to encourage schools to go through, because we've had several schools go through the training now and have had some very positive reactions from that. We've had McFarland, Suring,
Manitowoc. I'm blanking on some of the others.
Yeah, so what us bringing that steering committee together has enabled us to form some partnerships that might not always be who you think of, but now I know who to go to at DPI, I know who to go to at WCASA, I know who to go to at DCF to try to move some of this work forward.
Yeah, awesome. And I know it's been very beneficial to my work as well.
Good. I'll mention too, if this training sounds familiar and it's been in your community already, we are happy to come back and do this in communities that we've already been in. We know that we usually don't hit, or not everyone can make it to the table. And so we are always interested in coming back into communities and doing this again.
Generally, we ask at a minimum of 4 to 5 agencies participate. And as I say that, though, we've had organizations, I know McFarland School was one, and there was a Boys and Girls Club, where it's one organization, but it's multiple sites. And each of those sites actually develops their own plan as well. So, we can look at doing something like that as well.
Wonderful. And I know you talked a little bit about how folks can bring this training into their community. If someone on the webinar is interested, what would you say their first step should be? Should they be trying to find other partners in their community that are interested, or reaching out to you guys to get more information first?
That's kind of a chicken and an egg. So there is no wrong answer to that. Let me put it that way. If a community wants to say, hey, do we have interest? That's certainly right. Reaching out to Abby around the policy and procedure work is a great place to start. We did the overview today, but if you have more questions, or, you know, we have this meeting coming up with a bunch of organizations, are you able to come down? I don't think there's a wrong answer to that. It's what's going to work in your community and how best you think to start. If someone's interested in becoming a Stewards of Children facilitator, that should be just a quick email to me saying, hey, I'm interested. Next time there's a Stewards facilitator training, please let me know. And I keep a running list of individuals who are interested.
Yeah, and I know Helen is not on the call, but I've heard her, as well as many other advocates and prevention educators, say how incredibly beneficial that training is.
And it's an easy one. As a facilitator, it's video-based, which is awesome. You're really encouraging the discussion. If it has a downfall, it's video-based, so you better make sure your technology is working. But again, if anyone's interested, go on Darkness to Light's website and take a look at it.
Yeah, and I know I recommend that one to anyone that's interested in child sexual abuse prevention, as well as the policy and procedure training. But I've been recommending Stewards for a while now. It's a really great training. All right, so I'm still not seeing any questions coming in.
Okay.
So maybe we can go ahead and wrap up early.
Absolutely. I never mind getting a half hour back. We wanted to make sure we have time for questions, but also if there aren't any, or you feel that there are questions that you would like to direct just specifically to Abby or I, we welcome that. Our information is on that last slide. But again, if for some reason you lose that or can't remember, WCASA knows how to track us down. So
Absolutely, yeah. And I will say that I had some planned plant questions, and you guys were so thorough that I couldn't even ask them. So that may be why we're not getting questions. Thank you both so much for presenting, and thanks everyone for attending. Again, I can't promote these trainings highly enough. They're really fantastic trainings. Mary and Abby are really great trainers. So definitely reach out to them with your questions, and feel free to reach out to me with any questions around this as well. And I guess that's it for today. Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Thanks.